another bid for starving, a billion's mouths to feed. For the sake of mankind, we can never fail to succeed. So this small tribute to all the technies around the globe. So with this, I would request Dr. Parul Singhal, the Dean Commerce, Thakur College of Science and Commerce, to come and give the welcome address. Dr. Parul.
Thank you, Jyotsna ma'am. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome, Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, all delegates and participants present today. On behalf of Thakur College of Science and Commerce, IQAC, and Department of Information Technology, I heartily welcome you all to the third day, second session of INFOTHON CONCLAVE 2K20, organized under STEP Skill and Talent Enhancement Program. A brief about our college. Thakur College of Science and Commerce is the largest unaided institution in Maharashtra with glorious achievement in the field of academics, sports, research, and extracurricular activities. It is relatively a very young institution but growing, which started in the year 1992. It has completed the third cycle with A grade. It is a matter of great pride to share that the college has been conferred as the best college of the year 2018-19 by University of Mumbai. It ranks AIR 55 and 15 as the best college in Maharashtra. TCSE featured as top 10 educational institutions across India in the annual copy book Edupreneur by the Times Group. The college has expanded ways and bounds since inception in the student strength, number of departments, faculties, courses offered, etc. In an endeavor to provide quality education and sustaining its commitment to enhancing academics, even in this time of pandemic COVID-19, we are identifying ways and constantly providing platforms for such intellectual deliberations. We have had stalwarts like you, sir, in the inaugural session that you witnessed on the 14th of May. Now, today, we are honored to welcome Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, Vice President and Lead Architect Barclays from UK for our session. I'm sure this session too would be as intellectual, power-packed and captivating as others. With this, I heartily welcome you all and thank you all the participants from joining from around the world and the country. Thank you so much. Now over to Dr. Rupal Shroff, who's going to give us a brief about IQAC. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. A good afternoon and a good evening to everyone, and hoping that this conference be one of the most enlightening ones. To brief you all about IQAC, that is Internal Quality Assurance Committee. This, incepted in 2005, looks into the quality sustenance and enhancement by continuous progression in adding new programs, industry-oriented conferences, seminars, and other capacity development initiatives. At IQAC, we have always been instrumental to suggest quality initiatives and pursue the same to set benchmarks in quest of excellence. STEP, that is the Skill and Talent Enhancement Program, an initiative of IQAC, looks into this kind of development where we develop our youth to be industry ready. Today, when the world is facing difficult situation of COVID-19, IQAC of TCSE, under the chairmanship of Dr. Santosh Singh, has taken this initiative to provide a global platform through this international conclave for various advanced technological sectors and stakeholders of academia to come together as a part of our skill and talent enhancement program. I am very proud here, sir. I take pride in inviting Mr. Ashfaq Parvez today for a session on technology, architects, and governance. Over to you, Jyotsna ma'am.
Thank you, Rupal ma'am. Now, without wasting time, I just give a brief introduction about Ashfaq Parvez. Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, who is the Vice President and Lead Enterprise Architect with Tier 1 Bank, Barclays, UK. And now I would invite him to share his practical experience on architecture governance and control framework, structures, and practices run within the large financial organization. And I wish and hope that all students would get an early view of design methodologies and governance processes that would help them prepare for the future. So today we are presenting Technology Architecture and Governance by Mr. Ashfaq Parvez. So before we start the session, or I hand over the mic to the Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, just a little housekeeping for all the participants before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in the Zoom control panel. Keep your audio and video off during the presentation. So without any further ado, we will turn the time over to Mr. Ashfaq Parvez.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I think thank you for such a a beautiful welcome message. I really appreciate, and I think my sincere apologies to all the participants for the delay. I had some technical issues, and I'm happy to cover for the time. So yeah, I hope and I hope you enjoy the presentation. I think as just mentioned around the questions, I think I would personally like it to be in an interactive session. So feel free to raise questions. I'll probably pause during my presentation and probably address some of the questions. And but also probably will keep a few minutes away towards the end of the presentation where we can take all the questions. So without further delay, let me share my screen and please. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Uh, yes, it is visible.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes,
or
yes, it is visible, Mr. Ashfaq. It is visible. Yeah.
Okay, great. Somehow I cannot see the presentation and you can, I think. Oh yeah, I can see now. That's good. I think, yeah. I was thinking that of there. So I think this is just a I think a lot of presenters are already given in my introduction, and I think I on my inauguration address also gave a little bit in information about myself. So I think for those who are new to join new today or joining today, I think my name is Ashfaq Parvez. I'm the enterprise architect with Barclays UK, who is one of the tier one bank. My role is to look after all the risk decision systems within Barclays. So all the decisioning engines that we run. Apart from that, I support the unsecured, secured borrowing business functions for all the growth initiative projects. So so I think just to start with, just an agenda for today. I think what I like to cover today is give you sort of early view into what architecture governance is, and what is the importance of that architecture governance in the organization like Barclays. So I think some of the architecture principles actually are quite are quite similar, or those principles apply to any organization. But since I'm working for a financial organization, I'll probably some of the examples that I might quote may be finance related. So yeah, but I think the core principles apply in any industry. So I think I'll give you a bit of an early view, and I think this is pretty much a a high level sort of topic. But then I might have some sub slides which probably cover sort of some further details on the architecture governance. So that's my first, and then I'll take you through what usually the architecture strategies are. Um, and what are the criteria of measuring those architecture strategies, and how do we make sure that whatever we build within our technical estate to support any business function, how that is aligned to the architecture strategy. Obviously, in order to deliver some of these architecture strategies, we look at all the tech domains within the organization, and any changes to onto those tech domains, we follow certain standards, and sort of some models, obviously, so make sure that whenever there is any change initiated on those sort of tech domains, how do we address those whatever the patterns are. I'll talk about some decision-making framework as well. How do we make some architecture decisions, and how do we capture those decisions as well? And then towards the end, I'll also give you some one very high-level project example. That how, let's say, when a particular project is initiated in an organization, how do we then bind all these elements together and make sure there's a proper governance in place, and there are right checks and balances to make sure we deliver a value to the organization and to our end customer. So uh, this is what I would cover in my agenda. I'll move on to my next slide. But can you read my slides properly? Is it readable, visible? Just
Yes.
just just
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, cool. Um, Maybe I should start with the
Presentation.
presentation mode. So I think that's, if it is, much better. So okay. So now just to give you a bit of a background before I come on to the architecture governance. Looking at why we need this governance are like making sure that whatever we build is aligned to our business as well as technical strategy. That's a very basic definition. Now, how do we, and what is the need of this the governance? I think there must be some problems that we're trying to address by imposing some sort of architecture governance on within our organization. So let me give you a bit of a introduction to standard challenges that any organization would have. As we all know, in today's organization runs in a very complex environment. I gave an example on my introduction address, and I think I'll reiterate that in today's era, the business ecosystem is getting really complex because of the number of reasons. The When you start an organization, it's a very small niche organization. You address a very limited set of customer base, and then you start delivering services to the customer. And as you grow as an organization, you expand your business functions, grow as well. Then you have a number of business units within an organization. You add number of peoples. With this expansion, there comes number of business processes that you try to service different customers. And also, with these enhancements in these sort of technologies, today, I mean, in the historically, if I give an example of a bank, people used to go onto sort of branches to fulfill, or, to address any service. If they have to open an account, they have to invest in something, they want to transfer some money, they want to withdraw some cash. For anything, they would actually run to the branches, and I think everything would be usually addressed by branches. But I think then eventually, once the customer bases increases, you see the problems in the branches coming in. We in branches, you don't have enough staff to address huge customer loads during the days or thing. And also, with this digital transformation now, you can access your bank on your basically phone. You can actually, everything is digital now. I mean, so the new markets have sort of opened up. People now like to do all their transactions, manage their transactions through online channels. So as the new technology uh, are introduced, obviously it then makes organization to sort of adopt to those new sort of technology elements. I think if today there is a bank who decides not that they wouldn't have any online presence, but then eventually perish, nobody would like to sort of stay with that kind of a bank. So I think, so it becomes almost mandatory for organizations to quickly adapt to those business models, and at the same time make their presence available, let's say for example in an online channel. The other challenge we have today is because of earlier the financial industry per se was a very close knit sort of industry where we had globally we had a very limited set of traditional banks that they were running the whole economies of the world. The banks grew so big that they it almost became so difficult for them to manage their own sort of business functions. And I think and with number of crises, as you see we have seen in last few years, there have been number of crises in the financial industry, which has led all the regulators to just open up some of these services through smaller financial organizations. So a lot of fintechs, have come and play, and they actually offering some of the services, and in a very fast paced. They don't have any kind of issues of the legacy systems where the process takes ages to fulfill any customer request. So they're right in the face of the customer, and I think they fulfill a lot of their customers needs. Now that has become a greater challenge for the traditional banks. So that mentality of having fintechs, that some payment services, for example, somebody has come up with a very niche payment apps, whether it's Apple Pay or any other thing. So I think so those financial services which have opened up, there's open banking in space now. It has become mandatory for banks to share their information of the customer to other these financial organizations, so they are able to service those customers quite fast. So that's a big competition for banks. And then now I think the biggest challenge and I think as these traditional banks started to adopt to the fintechs model and service their customers, now there's a big challenge of the big techs, big tech like Apple or big technology firms, Amazon. They have come up with their own sort of financial services models, which I think they are pretty much working like banks. So that has imposed further challenge for these traditional banks. So now, so how do we then address these issues? Because I think the reason we are staying far behind in this race is because our technology estate is so old, so cumbersome. To bring a minor change in a customer journey can take months. So just imagine a process of lending customer a loan. In that whole process, if customer is an existing customer and um, goes onto your channel and requests for a loan or increase in the credit limit on their credit cards, or want to withdraw some cash or transfer money somewhere, the process is so cumbersome it could take ages to build that element within the online journey. It just the way the organizations are structured. To bring a change, there are a lot of governance in place. You have to talk to different business functions. You have to let them know. Then you look at the availability of the resources when all the teams can work together and deploy that change in the channel. You work with the downstream systems to whether it's the APIs or the backend system of records or the ETL process to make sure that that information is that whole journey is managed. So it has become very, very difficult. So I think so what we're trying to do here is set some standard. So it's like living in a like living in a really small or broken house, and I'm aspiring to live in a huge bungalow or a massive house. So I think this whole transition from as is state to the target state is what is defined, and this is what our senior stakeholders want. We want to move on to the sort of uh, very, very fast pace, and I think that's where we define these business strategies, these technical strategies, and then make sure that whatever we build in the organization is in alignment to what our business and technical strategies are. If we start building things in silos, then it will keep on adding technical debts. So you would use the same systems, same applications, same business architecture, and you keep on, it almost becomes a patchwork that you keep on building little elements within the legacy systems, and then it becomes very difficult to abstract any of those processes out of those legacy systems. So, and that purely slows you down immensely. So, and the other thing is like I said earlier, the regulations, customers themselves. If customer today, if there's a credit card company that can open a credit card for that customer in few hours, why would they go to a bank which would take a week for them to first ask them to go somewhere to a branch, fill the form, or send a form through post, or submit an online application? Then there'll be whole credit checks on that customer, making sure, looking at the batch processes, all the batch driven processes, which slows down the whole process. So I think customers have a very high expectations. A lot of these traditional banks and financial services companies are losing their customer base to these fintechs and other big tech organizations, because the customers want everything quite fast. They don't want to indulge in sort of old cumbersome processes. So obviously the customer expectations are high. They want a better services. They're intelligent now. So obviously we want to quickly adopt to that sort of expectation. The other one is the regulations. Like I said earlier, with a lot of these financial crises of the year, our regulators, all these different banks, or any organizations, are managed by some regulators. There are, so for example, in the UK, there's a Financial Conduct Authority, which makes sure that any financial organization works in line to this the rules and regulations and recommendation of that Financial Conduct Authority. You can't just run your own sort of processes. I think primarily that is to protect the customers who have invested in these organizations, whose money is within these financial organizations, to make sure that that customer interests are protected. So those regulations so now these regulations are changing quite fast. You have to adopt your every other day. I mean, I work for the bank, and I know every other day we spend kickstart many projects where it's purely a regulatory requirement. You must do this in a particular journey. When you lend a money, you must look at these criterias. So they come up with some guidelines, and I think we have to then make sure in our customer journeys those guidelines are implemented. And if you don't do that, you must have heard in number of news as well that an ex bank paid hundred some million of fine. So there are regulatory bodies sitting on top of you and making sure that you run your business ethically and you protect customers' rights. Now, because of this complexity, you need somebody who could look at this holistic picture. There are organization silos. What is that can bind all this together and look at something we can build, which is common to these different business functions? So I think that's where these enterprise architecture come in place. So I'll move on to the next slide very quickly. So now, so I said the enterprise architecture function, or the usually if you look at in an organization, it'll be a chief technology office, which I'm obviously part of. That would look at, that defines some strategies. They will work with the business. So business stakeholders want profits. They want to every other day come with new offerings for the customers, new business models. How do we offer this to the customer, and this would be how it is different from other banks, and what benefits it brings to that customer. This is how we can make money. And what we do as a technology firm is to make sure that those business strategies are that are defined, or business goals are achieved, and we build our technology estate to support those business outcomes. So obviously we work very closely with each other, and then to fulfill to make sure that any business function does not build something in silos. We define some IT strategies. If we have to build certain things, this is our strategic direction. Okay, for example, we would develop capabilities within, let's say, in a mobile app. So these are the business function. We should make sure that they're available within a particular, for a particular business function or financial uh, service is available in a digital channels, so etc etc. So I think so. So at high level, there are sort of four, and there could be more. I think if you look at a particular, the usual architecture frameworks that are quite popular in today's industry, whether it's TOGAF, the open group, architecture function, or Zachman, or there's so many architecture frameworks you can actually read through. And I think usually TOGAF is quite, I follow TOGAF, I'm a TOGAF certified. I like that sort of approach of the whole architecture model. So at a high level, I would say there's a business architecture in an ecosystem where businesses make sure they capture all the processes, all the business processes, all the business functions, and the whole information is available. Then there's sort of an application architecture where you make sure what applications we use within the ecosystem to make sure to support those business activities. And those could be any solutions, in the organization. For example, are there online applications you're using, what databases you're using, etc etc. Then there is a data architecture, which, because as I say, data is the key. Now I think we all know data is pretty much like a next oil, as people say. So I think over the period of time, um, organizations have captured huge amount of data, like uh, within the organization, especially these large banks, which are running their business for over 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years. Imagine how much data they might have captured for the customers. And I think that's almost like a strong point for these banks to make sure if they could leverage that data and use that data in their decision making, in their business processes. And that's what's missing. I think that's where the data architecture comes in, to make sure that the way the data is sort of captured, stored, extracted, transformed, etc. All that architecture principles are in place. That it defines how do we model our data within the organization, where the data should sit, how do we store, what are the different data, critical data elements within the business, how do we protect that data elements, how do we make sure that data is accessible uh, for the users, throughout the and across these business functions. It's not just that it's that data should not be leveraged by a particular one business function, but across the business function, so that if a bank has let's say 10 million credit card holders, 2 million loans customers, 4 million, let's say, I'm just giving random figures, 4 million current account holders, and there are sort of investment customers. How do we then leverage that power of data across these business functions and make sure that data is available? Now and then technology architecture is pretty much under the underlying I think environment that supports, for example, all the servers, virtual environment, etc etc. I think that falls under more technology architecture. Some of the key people that that the roles you might have come across are like enterprise architects, who actually more work at the more enterprise level for certain business functions, the overall looking at all the different business functions across um, um, the organization, and then obviously help in defining some the IT strategies, the architectural strategies. Then there are solution architects who work very closely with enterprise architects, and solution architects may be looking at a particular problem and defining a particular solutions for that problem, and that may involve different technical components that he binds together and make sure there's a real technical design available that could be then leveraged by the actual component teams and developers, and make sure they build the components as per that recommendation. There are business architects, obviously looking at the business processes, infrastructure architects. These are the different key roles that you might come across in the organization. So I think these are, I would also say, are the key architecture decision makers within the organizations. So I think they are pretty much on hook to deliver solutions which are in alignment with the organization's IT business and IT strategies. So I'll move on to the next one. So just give me a second. Okay, now we'll talk about so what is the, I mean, I think I did put a little bit of an emphasis earlier. So but I think this slide again reiterates that why we need architecture governance. As I said earlier, to make sure we achieve organization goals, whether whatever the IT business IT data strategies are, we build components and close any gaps there. And I think that's pretty much the need for having this architecture governance, so things don't are not built in a silos and we don't add technical debts. So a technical debt, I think most of you guys understand, is a sort of term where we do a bit of a patchwork. We keep on building things just to meet a very specific problem at in hand. And what we do is that lets we it solves our short-term goal, but in the long term it is detrimental to achieve your strategy, because the moment you try to unhook those things in the future, it costs you a lot of money and effort to even unplug that element that you've built. So what you're doing is, though you're solving an immediate problem, but what you're doing, you're adding a massive technical debt into your infrastructure, or your technical estate, and and I think remediation may cost a huge amount of money. So I think to make sure, so how do we then address this? I think as I said earlier, usually in any organization, chief technology office who actually are um, responsible for looking after the whole technical architecture, the target, uh, you know, uh, the desired target state, or the vision they have for the organization. They look after that to make sure that anything is built or a project is initiated. They have to make sure that they follow the architecture governance, which means that whoever is involved in terms of designing that solution, whether it's a solution architect or any particular, if it is a complex, then you'll have solution architects. There might be cases where it just be a BAU work for a particular component team. A particular technical component team is actually just making some minor changes within their components. For example, there's a um, an API developer is coming up with a new version of APIs, and they just, it's just like for like, it's backward compatible. They're not making any enhancements. So obviously, as part of their delivery cycle, they come up with a new version. But it might be BAU work because it's not fulfilling any business need. But I think even for those changes, they have to make sure they 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 get some kind of a sign off from a CTO, so that CTO will look at. CTO is so CTO runs that through different architecture councils. So for example, I sit on a lending design authority, where anything to do with the lending within the organization, even if there's a BAU change, we assess, we look at that and say, okay, if this is the change below threshold, obviously you can bypass some of the governance steps. If it is a change that is impacting one or more than one components, for example, you're making changes into the front end channels, you're making some changes to the APIs for integration, you're building new microservices, or you are making some databases changes, or and etc. So then you have to make sure that you present your design to those architecture councils and get their sign off. And but that uh, uh, does add some sort of a governance step, but it does not mean that the component team will stop working on the changes. They can carry on working, but they carry on working with a risk, unless that sign is signed off by the technically architecture council. So I think that's a key thing. So CTO will actually be responsible. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much running that governance on the any architecture change, to make sure that we mitigate any risk, we don't add any technical debt. Um, I'll just pause for a minute, and I just wanted to say that is there any specific question at this moment that anybody has?
There are few questions, Mr. Parvez. Uh,
Sure.
Benefits of service-oriented architecture to executive level. So this is one of the question. What are the various benefits of SOA to executive level, and what are the various type of cloud architectures? This is the two
Yeah.
question which I am finding.
Sure. Sure. I think I'm going to cover some of the cloud things here. So basically, you know, I think it's a very good question. So I think services-oriented architecture is pretty much, organizations are, moving on to more of a services-oriented, architecture, where is, for example, if you want to come for a particular business service, for example, I want to request for increase in my credit limit, for example, that's one of the process. How do we build the downstream systems as services? So basically, rather than building a huge amount of code to fulfill that request within a channel or on the downstream system, I can build some kind of a modular services. For example, I can create an APIs, or can be a microservice. I think things are now moving on to more of a microservice architecture than more service-oriented architecture. I think the new thing is that every organization is moving on to more microservices, like a more modular. So moving away from this monolithic applications, that traditional applications. I think the reason benefit is basically every time you want to make any business change. Imagine if you have to add an extra step because of the regulatory requirements, that okay, now you have to ask a particular question to a customer before you do any lending. If I build that on a monolithic application, what I'm doing, I'm making that change and I'm just stopping everything. Then I have to then um, make that change in that monolithic application. Then the whole application has to come down and I have to redeploy that whole thing. And so it's the amount of effort. So once minor change, the whole ecosystem is sort of kind of is changed. So I think that costs huge amount of money and delays, etc. Because I think stopping a huge monolithic application, you have to look at all the implications. What is the downtime? How do we then bring that up? What if that changes creates any issues? Then how do we address that issue? So there might be it is detrimental to organizations. So I think when we move on to more of a service-oriented architecture, which was more on web services earlier, now it is more I think like I said, today the world is about microservices. So where you these are pretty much an independent business functions in itself. So they solve a particular business function. So so for example, um, if I take an example of, let's say, Uber, one of the sort of providers of taxi services to organization. So if a customer has to request for a car, so there could be a service that is just looking at the requests. Then there is once the customer on boards, then there is payment services. The customer once the journey is over, the payment services will trigger and make sure the money is taken out of the registered customer's account. So I think rather than building in a one application, what they've done is they've created an individual business unit, I think services. So even if one service is down, obviously there's a resilience that is need of an hour. So everything you build for resilience. That is the key sort of um, approach we take on building these architectures. Build for resilience. So if one service is down, it doesn't mean that when the customer requests and request a taxi service, the taxi is on their doorstep. They start their journey and they finish their journey. If everything is built in one sort of application, then what happens is you fulfill one aspect of the process, the other and the service went down, and then you can't then take the payment out because of that's so you split that services into multiple modules, and every module is in itself is a business service, so which has its own. I think there are obviously some patterns that you follow when you build these microservices. So make sure that it has its own sort of database, data needs. They are modular, and I think that can make what you achieve is a business continuity. I think that's the biggest benefit of your business is not halted for any reason if you take that approach. Yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, I think that's pretty
Yeah,
much. Any other
there is
questions?
also one question we'll take. We say data is a new oil, but the privacy is myth, and there is a lot of data breach. So, what are the regulatory bodies are doing regarding this? Maybe you can correlate this question with reference to some architecture or maybe some securities thing.
Yeah. I think it's a good question. So you're right. I think this is the biggest challenge. I think when we say use of data, I think data privacy, uh, uh, keeping your data secure is a challenge, is the biggest challenge, and that's why all the data architecture organizations come up with some data data architecture guidelines. I think, like I said, we have a data architecture council that looks at the making sure how do we um, you know manage that whole data service. So as far as regulators are confirmed, I think every country's had. So now, for example, in here we have um, um, some GDPR requirements. So government bodies that are looking at data, make sure the data is you take customers consent before you you know um, uh, I mean play with any customer's data. I think so. So I think it's some so the data privacy requirements. So I think we have to adhere to those requirements. So if you don't, obviously, like I said, there are heavy penalties from the regulators, and organizations are getting heavy penalties, to be honest. So we have to then make sure that I think lately there was a lot of GDPR requirements in terms of you would manipulate customers' data only with the customer's permission. Even if you have to store a customer's data, if customer want to access their data. So, for example, if a customer comes in for a credit card application, and we ask customers a lot of income expenditure information, we tell them, okay, please tell us your yearly income. What's your what are your expenditures, how much you spend monthly on childcare, this and that. So I think we ask a number of questions. So this is customer data. Now this customer data, then we look at use that data. I think in the real-time journey we use that data in decision making. So we look at that customer's income, we validate that against the bureaus. We will look at and we then have we have to it's mandatory for us to ask in the journey to the customer, saying we are going to use this data in a decision making. We will reach out to bureaus, we'll share your income, we'll validate your income through X and X agencies. Are you okay with it? If customer says no, then we have to stop the journey then and there. So this is the power of for the customer. The customer has every right. And let's say if today customer gives me consent, I take that information, I process that data, take a decision, give some credit to the customer, and then customer comes back and tomorrow saying, what, you have given me less credit, or I'm looking for more credit, and I want to know how you have used my data. So it's again, it's a regulatory requirement for us to share the customer data that we have used for decision making. For example, sometimes we look at the customer and say, this is our existing customers, we already hold that customer's data. So I mean, we can simply, because we are the custodian of that data, and because by the virtue of that customers being our, let's say, let's say he has a current account with us, but now he has come for a credit card. During that, I can use because with the bank, I have the whole, access to that data, and I can see, I can see how much income is coming into his current account every month. I can use that data to take a decision, but the customer says, no, this is not, you have given me less, money. I am eligible for more. So I can go and tell him. So I have to then make sure I share that data back to the customer, saying, this is what I've used in my decision making. So obviously there are regulations in place that we need to adhere to. Otherwise, there are heavy penalties for the banks.
We can continue with the presentation, and later says we'll be selecting the question in a last. Sir.
Yes. Let's do that towards the end. I think I think in this slide I talk about like I said, when we define any business and technical strategies, these there could be the when you look at the senior stakeholders, the CEOs and CTOs and CIOs of the organizations, they can pick up, like, let's say, um, 3 or 4 high level strategies. They can say, okay, we want our digital presence for our customers. So those strategies can be very, very high level. There could be 3 or 4 strategies they want to take that organization to. I mean, they want they want to move their organization to a more digital centric sort of organization. So they might have like just 1 or 2 or 3 architecture strategies. And I think what that then triggers is that all the ecosystem that you have downstream, make sure anytime you make a change, you look at those strategies and make sure that you build anything keeping those strategies in mind. That, oh, if I'm building something in the sort of let's say full serve or customer facing channel, I can then look at the customer, our business direction is to build digital channels. So maybe we should look at moving these customers onto more digital channels like backlist app or online channels, etc. So how do we then uh, invest in sort of those? And I think that then as part of that strategy, they define what are the components within our ecosystem that are for us are invest. I mean, which are the components we are actually still consuming within our ecosystem that where we can actually invest, where it is okay to make changes and add new elements. And what are the components which are for us to maintain? I mean, these are the components we don't want as an organization, but we don't have a choice. We don't have a budget to invest in a more robust technology. Maybe we'll, for the time being, we'll maintain that. Okay, what we'll do is, for example, we have some enterprise middleware where that allows our online channels to talk to our legacy systems, backend systems. Now that enterprise middleware may not be is built over the year. It is not very strategic for us, but to replace that middleware, we might have to then invest heavily in some kind of ESB or some microservices sort of type of infrastructure. We then have to move from the legacy systems as well. So there's a massive investment required. So what we say is that we will then eventually move out. We won't move in one go, but what we'll do is we will call that as a maintain. I mean, we can actually still carry on building some components. For example, today through that service, I share 5 variables to the backend system. But there's a capacity for 20 variables. I'm allowed to add another variable. I'm allowed to add 6 variable, pass that variable, rather than completely changing it. So I think those are the sort of criteria as how a particular component within the your architecture is either is invest, it is maintain, or it is divest. And some of the components which is absolutely no. That, okay, for this particular business function, we would never store data in this particular data store. Everything has to move in a customer system, for example. Or if it is a customer's income and expenditure data, that would probably stay in will have a dedicated authoritative data store where the information will sit. So things like that, I think the strategy defines. And so that we would stop investing on the components that are not in alignment with our strategy. So we don't build any technical debt. That will create a capacity that will allow us to channelize those funds into more robust and cutting edge technologies. I think that's how we will eventually start building those foundations. So I think this is and bear in mind, these strategies are not like 6 months, 1 year. These could be 2 years, 3 years, 4 year strategies where we want to take our organization in next 3 years or 2 years. So eventually, during those 2-3 years, whatever changes we make into in the organization are in alignment with our strategies. So I'll move on to the next one. I'll give you some typical examples. I mean, there could be a number of strategies, tech strategies in any organization. I'll give you just some of them. Please don't quote me that these are the only strategies you can have. You can have a number of other tech strategies. I can give you some of them, some of these which are in obviously in our bank. So for example, some of the tech strategies may be always use a strategic analytical platform. So how we store our all the MI data today. I think we as an organization want to move on to more of a Hadoop based Optimus kind of components. So for all our data warehouse, I think we have a defined platform. So make sure that what that means is that tomorrow, if I'm working on a project where the data has to be extracted or ETL into some kind of a data warehouse, we should always try and build that within our strategic platform, which, for example, in this case could be Hadoop or something else. So you can't carry on using the existing your analytical platforms. So that could be one. Maybe use API for service integrations. So I think one of the things is like we are looking at I think RESTful APIs right now within our organization. All the channels when for any customer journey, or the the journeys we build from the channels we want. I mean, there are various ways of interacting with these sort of legacy systems. A lot of messaging queues, and they have built some enterprise middleware. Uh, 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 use SOAP based. SOAP is no more, I think, our recommended approach architecture. We move, like I said, we're moving into more RESTful APIs, microservices. So that could be our strategy, that we should try and adopt these API strategies to abstract a lot of these legacy processes, and build some API layers. So or we want to move host our application on the cloud. For example, I think somebody did ask the question on the cloud earlier. So I think, for example, a lot of these organizations are moving on to more I would say OpEx model. The For example, a bank. uh, Bank's core function is to provide financial services to the organization. They should be less worried and um, about maintaining the technical state, and become a you know um, spending huge amount of money in managing the data centers, and we end up um, even maintaining services or service or applications that are legacy, and it spend huge amount of money just to keep the lights on. We spend huge amount of money. So I think there's a big drive in not just our organization, across the globe. Every organization want to move onto a cloud based OpEx model, that it's a more of a service based, like you pay for the services you use. It gives you that elasticity. You can, as your business grow, you can very quickly scale up. If you want to move out of certain markets, you can scale down. You pay as you go. It's kind of a service. So it gives you that flexibility to the business. And then you don't have to maintain huge services and spend huge amount of money on upgrades and next versions, etc., etc. I think so that responsibility then sits with this cloud provider. For example, our organization is moving into more of a AWS cloud and a Salesforce environment. We're trying to move. It's not an easy process. It's not lift and shift. It's horses for courses. We are gradually moving our estates. So what that means, when as an design a solution, I have to make sure I look for this opportunity to move some of these elements, if possible, into the cloud services. Look at what cloud services we have available. Are you able to see my screen, by the way? I think I'm having some network issues. Uh,
It's quite visible. Take
yeah.
strategy example.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's good. So likewise, there's a lot of push on building those continuous, as we want to build more of a move on to more towards the continuous integration, continuous development environment, where build those DevOps capability, where the developers and the operations teams are working very closely with each other. And we are not looking at building a huge monolithic or in a large application, go through the whole uh, standard sort of SDLC cycles, where look at the requirements, baseline the requirements, then you start the unit building some of the components, then you do unit testing, then you do integration testing, then you do load testing, etc., etc. Then you do UAT testing, then you go live. I think it's the whole process takes uh, huge amount of time. So we are moving into more of feature-based development. Look at small features, moving on to like more agile methodologies. As you all know, I think agile itself needs a altogether new sort of session to go through, but I won't go through agile. But we are having this lean control approach, and we're moving more product based lean control, where this product owners will uh, have their sort of pipeline of work where they will keep on delivering these features in a short span of time. And what you do is you foster in the market. It's a more feature based. You don't wait for the whole requirements. You get the then come with the next set of requirements. I think this is more agile way of working. And it's not just the way you work, but it's also I think the whole I would say is um, uh, the way organizations work. I think the whole mentality has to change to be agile. It's not just buzzwords. I think you have to organize your teams like that. So you need to have scrum teams. Like for example, our banks, we have dedicated core labs where any critical project is triggered. We bring everyone in one room. So it's a small teams, scrum teams, where we run daily scrums. And there's a developer, there's an architect, there's uh, a data architect, there's all the teams, project managers, everybody working together and delivering those services in an agile manner. So, and also and there are a whole list. I won't go into everything, but I think, for example, we have to remove legacy systems. So obviously, what that means is that if I design something, I have to make sure that I don't build new processes on the legacy systems. Try and abstract that in some kind of microservices or APIs, and that's how we will slowly get rid of these legacy systems. And there are so many other things. I think how you build your applications as microservices and so on and so forth. I'll go on to the next one. Now, how do we achieve that? So obviously, within the organization, these are different tech domains. Now, these are tech domains, and the strategies have to be sort of linked. In terms of, for example, there's a analytics team. Obviously, they're looking at whole the analytics. So obviously, our tech domain is analytics. So anytime you touch anything to do with analytics, you have to make sure look at what is the strategies for the analytics. So that tech domains are the sort of technology areas within the organization where there are defined strategies for the tech domains. And I think the strategies that I was earlier showing you actually are
Hello.
All,
Yeah,
all,
Mr. Park.
all please wait here. There is some technical issues. All of you, please wait.
There is some technical glitch. Kindly wait. He's trying to reconnect again.
Hello.
Hello, everyone just kindly wait because there is some technical issue. Please kindly don't leave the session.
Mr. Ashfaq already connected. Teresa to make him co-host.
Sir, unmute.
Good,
Yes.
yeah.
Uh,
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Apologies. I don't know what happened. I was just kicked out of the Zoom session. But can you see my screen now?
No.
No, sir.
Teresa to make you co-host. Girish Tere. You are a co-host. Now you can start sharing screen.
Okay, let me share. If you let me know if you can see my screen
Yeah.
now. Can you see it?
No, sir.
Not yet.
Okay, I think it's this. I'm clicking on the share screen.
Sir,
This screen share. Yeah. Can you
Yeah.
see?
Yeah.
Let me know if you can
Yes.
see now.
It's coming. Yeah.
Is it okay?
sir, we can see your desktop. We cannot see see
Yeah.
your presentation.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes. So
now we can
now
see.
here we are into tech domains. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So I think I was talking about the tech domain. So I think now, now there's I think I've talked about tech domains. I've talked about the strategies. Now, let's look at the next slide, which is more about the how do we then make sure there's a governance in place for these tech strategies and the tech domain. So so what we're trying to say is that each strategy that is defined has is supported by some kind of an architecture criteria that the how the design would or changes would be implemented for those for tech domains, so or those to achieve those strategies. I think so it is underpinned by any so the criteria will underpin the strategy. It also defined what are the guardrails that you need to follow for those technical changes. As I think said earlier, that what you need to do for those changes to align to the your strategies. And I think and I think in that course you actually have to make some architectural decisions in terms of, okay, this is not allowed, this is how do, and sometimes those decisions can actually involve may have some additional costs, but I think it may be a cost to the project. But I think in a short term, uh, um, uh, it it might sound expensive, but I think you are actually saving huge amount of money, and you're moving towards your target operating model. And I think the reason I'm saying that is because when you actually work on the ground in any organization, we when we work with the project managers and those particular business functions to um, makes some specific change, and we actually design their solutions, it's almost a war between your own teams. Even though business knows what is their strategies are, we know what our tech strategies are, but when we actually go and deliver those changes, we get a massive pushback. Oh, why I have to pay so much just because it's your architecture strategy, and I can get that change done in a very, very short manner. But I think they don't see that the end picture, that how much technical debt we are adding by like I said, having that short-sightedness. I think we need to look at towards. I think that's the reason sometimes we as an architect make decision and they have to adhere to it. And there's a whole backing of the senior stakeholders on that. So I think but we have that sort of a fight within the organization to achieve that. And I said, how do we make sure that anybody who makes any changes adhere to that? Because like I said, there are design authorities within the organizations. Different companies may call different names. We call them technical architecture councils or tacs. Like I said, I sit on one of the tags. I'm also an architect. So when I design, I go to some other tags because sometimes you have to look at what their strategic direction is, and they can then go and recommend in the tags that whether we will approve this solution or we won't approve this solution, or go and make this X, Y, Z changes, and then we can allow you to make those changes on those tag domains. And that's how we have to adhere to those things. And I think if you don't adhere, obviously what we're doing is we are actually you know um, building anything at risk. So you might spend huge amount of money on building something and which the council will never allow you to go live with. So all that effort and money effort that you've used to build something will cost you massive. And I think that's never a good thing to do. So you always have to right at the beginning, before even you start some build processes, you put some high level designs and get those kind of approvals. Now in some cases, there are cases, like I said, some of the elements may not be in alignment to your strategic direction. For example, there are components which are in maintain state, which we know are not strategic, and but we have to build it. And sometimes, especially the elements which are more regulatory specific. For example, a regulation has come back and said, okay, you need to fulfill this requirement within 3 months, or I want to make sure that this particular requirement is fulfilled within next 3 months or next 6 months. And when you mobilize that change, and you realize that that change, if I go in a strategic direction, it might take 6 months or 8 months or 9 months for me to deliver that change. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to not fulfill the regulatory requirements, and I might have to pay heavy penalties. I think those specific cases, there are options where we go through the something we call as a dispensation route. You get a temporary waiver from the tax and the councils, and okay, you can build something, you can add this technical debt, but you have to make sure that in the next phase of this, because sometimes the regulatory changes have to be there, whether how technical you build it has to, as long as it is there, regulators are happy. But it may not be the best solution from the organization perspective. But what you do is you then mobilize a second phase, and it becomes then project's responsibility. Okay, you are allowed to go live with this technical change, you are allowed to build something very, very tactical, but you have to in your next phase remediate that. So you get those sort of dispensation for a period of time, and there's always a time bound dispensations. And then once you fulfill that regulatory requirements, so let the regulator know, they do their assessments, they're happy, they give you sign off, then you make sure the next phase is triggered and remediate that. As long as that remediation happens, it is there. I think these are the procedural things that, like I said, when you come to an organizations, there are a lot of politics around how you build components. There is a lot of it's not more about, I think obviously your knowledge about the tech components is always helpful, but there are a lot of things around those delivery that are important. And that I think that probably you would learn when you guys come into the industry and work for organizations. You'll see how these different organizations work. I think that's the real learning as well. And how quickly you have to modify your change and adopt to those changes as well. And these business requirement changes on a regular basis. While you're in a delivery, there might be some new requirement that came up, and then you said okay, fine, I can't fulfill. Then obviously it has to go into a phase delivery. So you sometimes take those tough decisions. Okay, I can't fulfill your requirement for this phase, it has to be the next phase. So again, it's an agreement within the business and yourself, and make sure you don't keep on changing things on a way. And that's the agile delivery methodologies, I think. So I'll go to the next slide. So I'll give you. I'm not going to go through the each tech domain and service. As I explained, I'll give you some one or two examples on that, and then I think we'll move on to the next one. So, for example, I was talking about a tech strategy which is a use API for service integration. So anytime you want to integrate two systems, when the channels are talking to a particular risk decision system, they should call an API. There has to be API strategy in place. An API could be different kinds of API, whether it's a process API, system APIs, how you call those services. Now Uh, so so this is one example which defines the criteria. So like I said, there's a strategy, there's a tech domain, there's a strategy objective why you want to have that strategy, and it also defines what business benefits you're getting out of the strategy. And then what is the measure? How do you measure that somebody is fulfilling those those sort of or aligning to the strategic direction, and what is the measure of success? So for example, I think if you I know you probably can't read, but I'll send you these slides and people can actually have a bit clearer view. But I think what we are saying here is that um, we the banks have the aging infrastructure. Like I said, interacting with the legacy system is not an easy job. I think you have to, I mean, they don't support microservices and that's API integrations. So like I said, you might build a process API which does the credit management of a customer, but then that API then has to call some middleware component, which could be a set of web services that will then go into a message queue of a legacy mainframe system. Then it'll look at each request, process that request, go back. And I think that, so it's a old aging environment. But I think what we do is we are saying, okay, don't build those processes within the legacy system, move them out, build them in an API. And so more and more API integration, rather than calling directly the channel. So I think you don't want to expose your legacy systems directly to the channel. So you have to go through the APIs. So there are obviously the whole authentication mechanism built within the APIs. There's a contracts, how two disparate systems will talk to each other. So all that would be built. So I think what is the business benefit? Business benefit is that you are actually moving away from legacy technology. You're building uh, so that way you can eventually remediate your excuse me, you know your aging systems, and you move on to the sort of more cutting edge technologies. I think you can build APIs for open banking. Open banking is quite popular now. That today, if a customer comes um, uh, for any service within my bank, and I want him to validate his income expenditure, rather than him providing me all the documentation or the pay slips, etc. Let's say a customer is not a Barclays account holder; he's with HSBC or some other bank. And how do we then make sure that that information is available? And let's say his current account is with HSBC. I want to see his ingoing and outgoing income. So I can there's an open banking services available now where I can ask them, okay, are you okay for me to access your third party bank? So customer can give consent in the journey itself, and I can move him to the in open banking API services. I can call the open banking services of the HSBC bank. Obviously, they can then go through the authentication mechanism of logging in the customer. Customer can actually enter their details, and it can give us sort of all these transaction information. So I can use that in a real time rather than waiting through the batch process. So everything is becoming near real time. I think that these APIs obviously helps you uh, move on to sort of that direction. And I think, like I said, so I think what is the measure of success? Like I said, less and less spending on the legacy systems, more and more moving it towards the divest environment. So if there's a notable spending on the API infrastructure in your design, it shows that you're spending on a strategic sort of tech domains. And I think those services can also available. Now these API service can be, I think the biggest benefit is that the reusability. If there's a service that gives me customers personal information, that information can be used by every business function. So one service that can service multiple business functions. So I think that's also the great benefit of using services. And also not exposing your backend databases directly to the channels or your front end systems. You can look at having system APIs. The actual system of record can expose some system APIs that you call, and that system API will fetch data for you, which is kind of more secure, and so on and so forth. So this is just one example. I move on to the next one. So I think there are a few around the user interfaces as well that I won't go into the details here because we don't have enough time. But for example, how you build your user interfaces, whether it's a Barclays app or online or multi-channel applications, etc., etc. So the front end changes. There are whole. So these are the strategies which are defined, and I think when we and this is they're also about removing legacy technologies and so on and so forth. So I'll take a pause here and see if there's any questions.
Mr. Ashfaq, we are running out of sort of time now here. So there was one question which will take it here. Can we migrate our traditional application to the cloud architecture?
Yeah.
There was one,
So I think, I think it's a good question. The reason is that it is, like I said earlier, it is not, lift and shift. You can't just move. It's about what are the processes that are built in the legacy system, and then how do you move those processes. So I think if your process is quite legacy in nature, there's no point of lifting and shifting that in the cloud environment. That is one way of doing that. The other thing, the best way is picking up each business process and build as a sort of a new. Like I said, it depends on your environment. Of course, the legacy system. That's the whole idea of banks as well, moving to cloud. That we need to move this legacy system into more cloud-based in environment. But mind it, there are regulation. There are some um, you know in place. Example, you can't expose some of the customer data in a public cloud environment. It has to be, if it's a customer's PI data, which is a critical data element, that cannot sit in the cloud. If there are risks or your risk strategies that cannot sit in the cloud, so that has to be built in-house, and so on and so forth. I think it depends on what kind of guardrails you have put in your cloud environment, and if somebody's satisfied with that, and then I think you can put things in there. So I know we are running short of time. I won't take much time. I have I'll just quickly. There are I think only two slides left, and I understand. So this is. I won't go into details. Like I said, I was talking about data architecture. This is what it is. So like you define in your data architecture governance that what data will sit where. So the terms like authoritative data store, the income expenditure data should go in a particular database. These could be your Oracle databases or could be your NoSQL databases, MariaDB or whatever. But and how you want to access the data. So when you want to access data, you can't make direct call into the authoritative data store. You have to go through the access layer, which is more about ODSs, operation data stores. So these are the kind of rules that are defined. Like I think there was a question earlier. So this is how we define that how you will store data and how would you access data. And so it's a single place for every business unit within the organization. So I think I'll send you this slide. You can go through it. And the last is, I think, pretty much on the API design patterns. So when you design APIs, what are the patterns that are approved? There are some anti-patterns, obviously, you can run, but with some risk. But obviously, this is where we want to be, in terms of there's experience layer, there's a process API, there are system APIs. That's how you talk to your system of records, etc., etc. So I mean, this was the project example that I did, actually, one of the design. And I just wanted to show you that here you see there are channels on the top front where customers come and interact through channels. Then there's API layer in the middle. These are all the process APIs we hold. Then there are, if you see a yellow BEM layer here, this is more of a legacy SOAP-based web services that we use to talk to our legacy systems. For example, Tride9 is a legacy system. How do we talk to that system? How do we store data, etc., etc.? So, well, I'll just pause here. Any last question and answer? And I think you can have my contacts, and always reach out to me for any further questions. But any last minute questions before I close?
I suppose most of the questions we have covered, but we can take the last question, I suppose, still here, whether the cloud services are secured, specifically SaaS. So this
Yeah.
will take it as a last question.
Yeah. Sure. I think, of course, they are. I mean, if you look at the amount of investment these companies have put in, there are enough guardrails. And I think it's, if you look at the security, I think it's a multifold thing. It's not just the cloud security. You can put, like, you can have a more virtual VPC environment, which are much more dedicated to your instance, to your particular organization. Then there are guardrails you put on the application itself, that if you deploy any strategies, how you deploy that. There is an authentication mechanism. You put as a jar files rather than the actual data. So I think things like that can always be put in place. And I think obviously, but then there are some regulatory requirements that some things you cannot put in cloud for financial organization, for example, some of the PI data. And this regulation can change in the future. So they might start putting it, but sometimes the core data can sit. And so I think that's where it's a hybrid sort of combination where certain elements sits on your your own data centers or in-house, and then some elements can move on to. So some of the workflows can move into the cloud environment. Yeah.
With this, we'll end the session. Jyotsna, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, for such a wonderful session, because there are so many questions which we could not address actually.
And there were a lot of appreciation in a chat
Yeah.
box that I must say here, and I must acknowledge. And most of them, they were very happy with the session, amazing session, or the best session for the entire conclave. Yeah, Jyotsna, yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, everyone.
So, Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, thank you so much. It is your early morning, and we have the afternoon here. So it was a great session. I hope all the participants, they have enjoyed the session, and it was actually very insightful because you shared the real-time, your experience with all the participants. So thank you so much. Is Anand audible?
Yeah,
Anand,
yes,
can you
audible.
hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now
Yes.
I request Mr. Anand Upadhyay, he is the conclave secretary, to come and give a formal vote of thanks.
Good morning, Ashfaq sir, and good evening, all my award participants. Behalf of Thakur College of Science and Commerce, Principal, Management, and my HOD and my all colleagues, we are very thankful to Ashfaq sir for giving his valuable time and coming in the session and giving a nice, very interactive and a very valuable talk on the e-governance and governance architecture. And we are very thankful. We are thankful to all participants, also those who have participated in the session, and we will look forward the same cooperation in the future. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Now over to you, Jyotsna ma'am.
So I request
just a minute, one important announcement here. Now the feedback link is changed. There is no auto generation of the certificate. You need to submit your feedback link in a chat box which is available now, and there will be no circulation of the feedback link over the WhatsApp. So you'll be receiving a certificate in next 3 or 4 working days. Thank you very much here. And there should not be multiple discussion about not receiving the certificate or sending a link on a WhatsApp. So thank you so much for your cooperation. We can very well understand here we have now back-to-back session, but now we'll end the session and again we'll start after 15 minutes because of the live YouTube link and other extra formality. Teresa, to end the session, please.
So thank you, Mr. Ashfaq Parvez, once again. Now you can go and take the rest.
Thank you, Ashfaq sir. Yeah, thank you.